and welcome to another episode of FooBar. In today's episode, we are talking about Fargate and CDK. If you want to know more about serverless, cloud computing, or software engineer practices in general, subscribe to my channel in the red button below. I post videos on Tuesdays and on Thursdays. So let's get started. Another episode in my series. This is not a podcast, and today I have Martin Beebe. He's principal developer advocate for .NET, but we are not going to talk about .NET. We are going to talk about CDK and Fargate. These are two topics I've been trying to get my hands onto lately, but I have not had time. So what is the best way than to have a guest and show everything to us? This is a great talk because we go through a masterclass. We start from nothing until we finish with something, and I learned so much in the process, and I hope you do. It's a long session, but you will get so much out of it that it's totally recommended. It's very hands-on and it's a great session. So let's go to it. Hello and welcome to another episode. Today I have an amazing guest. I have Martin Beebe. He's the principal developer advocate for .NET, but we are not talking about .NET today. We are talking about containers and CDK. So I'm extremely excited to have him today. So welcome, Martin. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I am very involved in .NET, but we are going to be talking about, predominantly we're going to be using TypeScript today. So I don't know how familiar you are with TypeScript, Marcia. Have you seen
More
it much?
More than .NET.
Yeah, okay. Well, as languages, actually, they're ridiculously similar because they come from the same, Anders Hausberg, the same language developer, developed both languages. So there's a lot of similarities, which is why I'm usually quite comfortable in flipping between the two. Although in the demo today, if you do see me make typos and stuff, it's not just that I'm terrible. It is just the fact that it's not like my natural language generally. So, well, it might be because I'm terrible, but you know.
Don't worry. I use Node.js always, and I make so many mistakes when coding because, let's be honest, coding and talking and doing like three things at the same time is very hard. So nobody will judge you.
This is entirely Node. Like it's almost identical to Node, apart from it's under the hood. It's all compiling down into Node, which we're going to be doing anyway. So it should be relatively familiar. Yes. And you could, to be honest, the cool thing about the CDK, which I want to show today, is that I could do this actually in .NET, or I could do it in Python or TypeScript or JavaScript even. Yeah. TypeScript actually is the language that its default language. It's what the actual project is written in. So it's quite nice to see it. If you're going to look at it first, it's quite nice to see it in TypeScript because that's the purest form of CDK. So.
Yeah, and I think because CDK, well, we will talk a little bit about how it's built, but the way that it's done with all these modules and these kind of types, in a way, it suits very well to a language like TypeScript, more than Node that is like, JavaScript, let's do whatever.
Well, I'd say it's easier to find mistakes.
Exactly.
When you're writing CDK, it will show you it's much more likely to show you the errors meaningfully in TypeScript than it would be if you just use plain JavaScript.
Exactly. So I think it suits very well to do it in TypeScript more than JavaScript. And I think at the end of the day, TypeScript is a really good language. I only use it a little bit here and there, but I always enjoy it a lot. So maybe we can start with why. What is CDK and why?
So you can build, obviously, AWS infrastructure in like a million ways. You could go into the CLI and you could write that stuff. You could go in the console and build it all through the console.
Don't do that.
Well, I mean, do whatever you feel. I don't care how you want to do it. I don't judge. Like, do whatever you want to do, right?
Use infrastructure as code. That's my judgment.
Precisely. And infrastructure as code is the exact key point for me. Now, I'm a developer, and code, in my view, isn't necessarily YAML or JSON. Like, I don't necessarily think in script like that. And so it's always felt slightly uncomfortable for me when we talk about infrastructure as code, and you look at something like CloudFormation or Terraform, and it's YAML and JSON. Like that's fine, but I'm always, as a developer, thinking about how I never touch those things. I always wanted to generate them. So I'd write scripts to go generate my CloudFormation and stuff. And really, that's what the CDK is. It's a project where you write code and it will generate YAML for you. So it ultimately generates CloudFormation templates. So it's nothing more than a really clever, integrated builder for CloudFormation templates. Oh. And so it just that the abstraction, the lens that I take upon it is a programming language, and I can do programming languagey things in it, which make me just feel a little bit more comfortable. Now, what I like about it is that because it's just generating CloudFormation templates, if someone who is in operations, maybe they're not so familiar with programming, they're actually just dealing with CloudFormation templates. So they can deal with it in the language that they maybe prefer to deal with it in and use it in. But it's actually, when I'm working on it, it's being built in a programming language, which is way more.
Will be like the machine language and the programming language on the top, generating that machine language at the end of the day.
But that's like modern development nowadays. It's just these abstractions on top of abstractions ultimately it all goes down to a shell script. And then it runs. But it's like, I spent a long time building infrastructure as code things, and I would build, originally very long bash scripts or very long PowerShell scripts to create in my infrastructure. And then, there's template engines and so forth. They're good, but I never really learned how to do that. I honestly, if you gave me like a notepad and told me to go and write you a Terraform script or write you a CloudFormation script, I would have to Google it. There's no way I'd be able to do that off the top of.
I wonder who can write CloudFormation without Googling it. At least out of the basics, it's just.
It's hard. I'm not so about CloudFormation, but I did see someone which was writing IAM permissions, like in reInvent, in one of the sessions, and she was just basically writing IAM policy from like top of her head. Like that's something I could never do.
I can write some basic policies, like maybe Dynamo and like things that I use a lot, but out of those.
Exactly. But so I guess it's just the CDK or Cloud Development Kit is what it says. It's a way of building cloud infrastructure, but using your favorite language, and it supports a number of languages. TypeScript, which is what the actual project's built in. JavaScript, obviously, because anything in TypeScript could be written in JavaScript. Python, they have a language abstraction for Python. They have a language abstraction for .NET. And I think that's and Java, of course. I don't do much Java at all anymore. But Java, and then I think they're publicly working GitHub on other languages and stuff as well. So, but at the moment, you can kind of choose any of those and start building with it. And the reason I'm going to kind of show TypeScript, I guess, is just purely because that's the purest form of CDK.
Yeah, and I think because I do so much Node, people maybe in my channel are more familiar with TypeScript than with maybe .NET, because I think I did .NET in school, and that was it. So I don't even remember how to write.
You should be able to take CDK TypeScript stuff and probably almost just copy and paste it into a C# folder, and it would work. It's TypeScript and C# are almost identical in many ways. You'd have a few semicolons and a few different, but the cool thing about TypeScript is you can pretty much, I can look at what I've done in C# and translate it into TypeScript easily, and vice versa. So they're quite similar languages, but the CDK supports them both. So choose your own weapon.
Exactly. And why we will go with CDK instead of SAM, for example? Because SAM also will give us some kind of short path to build common things like functions or API gateways.
And actually, interestingly enough, for serverless projects, I often use SAM. Like I think SAM's has a toolkit built around it that makes it easy for building serverless style applications. The problem is very few applications that I've built stop at the
edge
on the areas where SAM is really good at. And so if you then want to do there are things which are slightly more, like for example, I wanted to add just a domain name and an HTTPS certificate to my SAM template, and I found that much more complicated than it was in say CDK.
Yeah, and so you need to go to the CloudFormation template basically, because SAM can be extended as CloudFormation. Yeah,
exactly. So you're kind of escaping out of it into a new world, and so SAM has its place, but I think, and when it comes to serverless applications, it's really useful because it has that whole build locally sort of thing into it as well. So I must admit that I recently built a serverless application, and I chose to use SAM, and I found it actually quite difficult to rebuild that. Okay, so I think they're similar things, similar concepts. The idea that CDK is that it's for everything in AWS, though, not just serverless applications. And so if you wanted to build in any kind of infrastructure, there is a construct. They're called constructs in CDK. Yeah. There should be a construct for that. So the concept is...
So how to make a VPC in CDK, and it's so simple. It's like one line of code.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll literally do that in a minute. But
and that blew my mind, because if you want to write that in CloudFormation, I don't know, it's like 400 lines of code or a configuration that you don't have a clue what you're writing. So all these defaults are amazing. It's just like...
And that's actually one of the things that I really like about CDK is that I think AWS can be a little bit scary when you first come to it. And one of the things that's scary about it for me as a developer is the infrastructure aspect of it. Like my knowledge of NAT gateways and subnet masks is all really limited. And I knew this, I learned a lot of this stuff over my career, but I'm not technical in the networking stack and style of things. So I always struggled with the concept of VPCs and making sure things connected and things could talk to each other. And what I find the CDK does for me a lot is just makes that stuff really straightforward. And what it's doing in the background is, of course, it's having to set all that stuff up, but it's using what it terms sensible defaults. Yeah. So it's trying to give you the most common scenarios that you would choose. You can override all of it, but by default, it's got some sensible defaults in. So it means that when you create a VPC, you new up a VPC object, you set up how many availability zones it's available in, and that's it. Yeah. It can be one line of code.
And I think that lowers the barrier to entry to make infrastructure as code, because if not, then people will go to the console and click it through, because that's kind of the easiest way than to build the CloudFormation template. So that's a great way to open the door. So for many people to build infrastructure as code, that is the most important thing you should do when you're building infrastructure in the cloud.
The thing is, yeah, absolutely. The cool thing about it is it makes it repeatable. And that's the key to it all, is that once you've got it in something like CDK, it's repeatable, and you can make modifications, and you can keep track of those modifications because you can check it all into source code, and you can see how your project progresses, rather than as you say, going into a console, having a list of instructions, and then someone changes one of those things in the console and you don't know. Exactly. What's really interesting, obviously, because it's using CloudFormation, you can do things like see if it's drifted from what it was set up as, and those sorts of things as well. So I'm just finding that I'm not a complete convert to CDK. I'm not using it on absolutely everything, but I'm tending to do on projects which I think have got which are not just pure demos. I generally write a CDK template for it, because it's like, this is it will save me time in the long run. If I'm just testing a single feature, I might not create a CDK project for it. But
that's something, at least for me, CDK and Amplify are these two products that I think shows the democratization of the cloud, if you understand what I mean, like opening it up for people that are not into all this infrastructure and all these crazy details, like making a VPC. So many things we know already. What are the defaults? Why we need to ask them over and over again to the users? So I think it's super exciting, and the same with Amplify, opening the door to all these client developers to build their applications without knowing much about the cloud. So for me,
I think though that Amplify is a different level of abstraction.
It is. It's a totally different thing.
Amplify is really sweet for you literally need to know nothing but Node. You don't need to know anything about how really AWS is working in the background. I'd say when it comes to the CDK, it's a little bit deeper, because you do feel the infrastructure, you can see it happening and stuff, but it's just it's a nice level. For me, it's a nice level of abstraction. I'm not sure how well that is for everybody out there, but for me, Like if you're anything like me, then it's a really.
But I think it's a different audience, because when you're working with Amplify, mostly you're working with client developers and people that are more in the front end or app development. And when you're working with CDK, you're mostly working with backend developers. So it's a different level of comfort that they can find in the risk and in the amount of details that they want to know of the platform. So I think that's the great thing of the amount of tools that they are there. You can go hardcore with CloudFormation, or you can choose different tools that suits your needs. So
okay, yeah. The thing is, when you say hardcore with CloudFormation, the cool thing is this generates CloudFormation. It's super hard. It's super hardcore. Like the cool thing is, if you're just into CloudFormation, it's quite a good thing. CDK is actually good to learn CloudFormation, because you can write something and then look at the CloudFormation and see how it's done. And I've done that weirdly. I wanted to do something in SAM, couldn't achieve it, knew how to do it in the CDK, generated it in CDK, looked at the CloudFormation, and then translated that into SAM. So like there are, it's just another little tool to help you on your way of how you would how you wire some of the more complicated scenarios. It can be really helpful as a learning tool as well. And I'll show you.
Interesting point, because I heard a lot of people say that CDK is very bad for learning CloudFormation because it separates you from the CloudFormation, because you don't need to see it, but it's true, you can see what is the generated code, so it depends on the angle.
You don't need to see it, but you can, and that's the cool thing. It's like you can, if you want to explore it, then it's there for you, and it's done really, like I'd say the CloudFormation outputs is really like way more sophisticated than the CloudFormation I write. So you'll see, it's interesting anyway.
Cool. So we are going to start building then a project in CDK, and we are going to use Fargate. Do you want to chat now about Fargate, or should we start building first and then
I just want, or just, it's probably just useful just to set it up to explain what it is a little bit, because I'm basically, the reason I'm going to be using Fargate today is because I want to put a container on the internet. That's what I want to do, and that container is going to host a website. And this is like, nowadays, that's pretty much the way that I build websites. I build it into a container, and then whatever my hosting platform, it has to run a container. And so the easiest way, in my opinion, in AWS to run a container is using Fargate. And so there are numbers of ways of running containers in AWS. I'm using Fargate on ECS. So ECS is the actual service that I'm using, and it's got a launch type of Fargate. And all that means is that my container is not going to be running on an EC2 instance in my account that I manage. So I don't create a cluster that I then run, a cluster of machines that I then run my container on. There is a cluster of machines, but they belong to AWS. And that's like a pool of machines, which is basically what Fargate is. And then I basically send my container definition to that pool of machines, and it runs that container, and it connects back to my VPC through a NAT gateway, which I don't need to set up or anything like that. But so it can talk to all of my stuff in my account, but it's actually physically running on infrastructure ran and managed by AWS.
Like Lambda, for example.
Exactly like Lambda, which is sometimes why it's called the serverless container option. I don't necessarily like that object, but if you define serverless as meaning you don't need to manage the servers, then it is a serverless option, because it means that, you know, I don't manage any of the instances or the patching or updates or anything. I just literally send you my task definition, and AWS runs it however they run it. I'm not really quite sure in Fargate if what they're doing, how they actually physically run that. But it's managed by them, and it makes it. And then I basically pay for the amount of compute and the size of memory and various things that I'm using from Fargate.
Yeah, the AWS definition of serverless is like 4 things. Like, first one, you know how to manage infrastructure, so Fargate checks that one. You pay for how much you use. You just said that that's the case, and I think that's in general AWS way of doing things. And then you have high availability built in, meaning that it's deployed in multiple availability zones. Is that the case?
That's the case, yeah. So
you
get
don't
to
need
choose.
To define it.
No, you get to choose how many availability zones that you want a Fargate cluster to work across. And it's a what do they call it? Like a regional service. So it has that high availability built into it.
Nice.
And that means that you don't have to worry about some of that aspect of restarting it if things fail. So it ticks that box as well. Like it has resiliency built into it.
And what about automatic scalability?
Yeah, precisely. So you have scalability, which you can define in Fargate. So you can say, I want 8 of these containers. But you also have options that you can scale those things as well. So you can have, like, I don't know, if you had a trigger saying about CPU usage spiking or whatever, you could increase the number of tasks, which were basically or effectively the number of containers you're running. So yeah, you can elastically scale based upon lots of different metrics and things. The one we're going to be building, actually, we will run it across 3 availability zones, and we will ask for 6 of them. It's not going to do scaling necessarily, but if I wanted to scale it, I'd just have to change or modify the number, or I wouldn't manually do it. We'd have some kind of system which changes that number. So
it has some kind of auto scaling in place. The more traffic you have, then the more machines or containers or whatever.
However you want to do it. Traffic, CPU usage, memory peaking, or seasonality. You might have a schedule of. You could any way that you would be able to do it. So it's not insane that Lambda that it will just Lambda just increases as the and the scalability, you don't really have so much control over it. With Fargate, you actually have a lot more control, so you can customize how you would want it to scale and scale in, scale out.
And you always have something running. It's not like Lambda that if nobody's calling you, then it's totally off. But
no, I mean, you could say you don't want any tasks running, and then
you can scale to 0.
Of course, yeah. So you can have no containers running in a service, no tasks running in a service, and that would mean that no containers are running. So you could scale to 0, so it has all those capabilities and so forth. The difference probably being with something like Lambda, you're really only ever paying for execution. Like something comes in, it stops. Like we don't have that, so the containers don't start up and then stop when the execution stops in that way. So these containers will generally be running for a while based upon their auto-scaling sort of schedule, or however you set up auto-scaling.
Nice. And can you do Fargate also in Kubernetes?
Yes, which is why I said that it's a launch type of ECS. So this is quite confusing because Fargate used to only be on ECS.
Yeah.
And it used to look like its own service. And when I joined AWS, I thought it was its own service, but it's not. It's basically this pool of compute that are used by ECS. And so what they've done is they've enabled that for Kubernetes as well. I think we were definitely, when we launched, we were the first cloud provider which offered Kubernetes with this kind of concept of serverless nodes.
Yeah.
That these nodes. I'm mixing between containers, so terminology. So in Kubernetes, it's not. Is it nodes? Yeah. The level of compute is a node. So those nodes used to be like EC2 instances, and pretty much instances or virtual machines, whatever cloud you're using. But what we've done is we changed the way that the Kubernetes control plane schedules stuff, and we've enabled it to, instead of using real EC2 instances, it can sort of set up EC2 instances in Fargate and deploy to those things as well.
Wow.
So that's a completely different topic.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
It's very interesting. I think it was sort of December last year that was.
Yeah, for README they launched it, I think.
Yeah, and so it makes it possible to have a Kubernetes cluster which scales to 0. So you have no infrastructure apart from the control plane, and then when jobs come in to Kubernetes, a container needs to be deployed.
Yeah.
Then it can create that infrastructure does it on the fly inside of Fargate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super powerful.
I think the problem is, though, with all of this container stuff, is that we have 2 services, ECS and EKS, or the Kubernetes stuff, and then the sort of the regular Elastic Container Service. And then we have this launch mode, which is Fargate, which is another way of doing it. And then if you get deeper into it, there's other ways of running, like auto-scaling in Kubernetes. There's loads of different ways that you can do that. And there's auto-scale sets and all sorts of complicated stuff. And it's really good because it's like a mixed bag where it's like a sweet shop where you can do anything you want. But it's really bad from a perspective when you're coming into it fresh and you see all these options and it becomes overwhelming.
That's our job, to make it, remove all the noise. Try to help people to come to the best solution.
The beautiful thing is, I should hope people recognize that with containers on AWS, there's loads of options that you can choose, and know that, and there's loads of flexibility, but there is also an easy route, and I'm going to be showing you one of the various easy routes to create a container running in AWS.
And I think that's in general the AWS way. We give you as many options, so you don't need to like adapt your applications to what the tools we support. It's like, well, you have everything. The same for databases. There are like 16 different types of managed databases, and like there's options everywhere. And as for a seasoned like cloud developer, it's like candy store. For a beginner, it's like, what the hell?
Exactly.
But that's why we have a shop. We have to help everybody to get started.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let us be your guide.
Exactly.
Okay.
So maybe we can share the screen and get started then, because I'm super excited to see this in action.
So the CDK is fundamentally a TypeScript project. So everything you do in it will be very familiar to a Node developer or a JavaScript developer, because we're going to be using things like NPM and that sort of stuff. So to get it installed, whatever language you're doing, you would do npm install -g for global AWS-CDK, and that will go up to the npm. That will go to npm and go and get everything you need for the project. I've obviously already got it installed, so I'm not going to start from a clean instance, but that would just go and get me the tools that I needed. So I'm just going to go and create a directory, and we'll call it demo FooBar, and just cd into that. Oops. Okay, so now we have our little folder which contains nothing at the moment. So what we're going to do is we should now have a command, CDK. So the CDK command has lots of different options that I can run. So it's like a little tool that I've now got globally where I can start doing stuff with the CDK. Now, the thing that I'm probably going to want to do first is create a sample project. So CDK has a command in it called init, and I can say sample app, which I want, and then I choose the language that I would like to choose.
Is that sample app like the name or the name of the template?
Precisely.
Make a sample app?
It's the template. So I think when we go and create this create this thing, there's lots of different switches that you can do on init. So you can change the project name and so forth. You can change the template that you use, but sample app is going to build you the sample app, which is available in all the languages. So if you were to say --language TypeScript, which is what we're going to do, it's going to create that sample app in TypeScript. But like equally, if you were doing Python, you could say Python, or if you were doing .NET, we have a few different aliases for that. It's like C#. I think you can also write .NET. And if you were doing Java, you would just write Java here. And the sample app template is available in all of those languages. Now, some of the CDK sample apps, you can download templates, I believe. I don't really do that, but you can download different templates and things. But that sample app one's going to be available in all languages. So we know that's going to be good there. So if I want TypeScript, I put TypeScript in here. So CDK init sample app -- language TypeScript. And what that will do is go to npm, and it will do some stuff for me. It's going to initialize a Git repository. It's going to do npm install, and it's going to show me some useful commands. I've got npm run watch, npm run test, CDK deploy, CDK diff, CDK synth. And we'll look at all of these things. Now, these commands will be different depending on the language that you've chosen. So basically, because I've chosen TypeScript, it's a Node project. So npm run build is going to run whatever in my build section of my project.json or whatever thing it is, and it basically will compile my TypeScript to JavaScript. So obviously, if I was choosing C#, this would have a list of commands which would work on C# here to do the builds, watches, and tests. But the CDK deploy, CDK diff, CDK synth, that's going to be the same whatever language you're going to be using. So those commands would be maintained the same. Ooh, let me just try and get out. So that's got all the dependencies I'd need. It says it's got a little tick, says all done. And now if I just list that folder, Now I've got some stuff in my folder. I've got a README, a bin file, a CDK.json, a jest.config.js. So all of this stuff is useful for our CDK, but it's all boilerplate. It really doesn't need all of this.
What caught my attention, because in CloudFormation and things like that, because it's a configuration file and not code, you don't see tests. So that's something very interesting to see in infrastructure, because now we are writing proper code that you can have tests.
Yeah. And tests are, like, even when it comes to building infrastructure, are quite important. I will be completely honest with you, though. I so rarely have built a CDK test, and maybe I should build that into my process. But that's like literally, they've put it in there as a best practice. But the reality is, most people that I've seen use CDK don't actually write tests. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And it's cool that you've got an option and that they've made it like a best practice. So if I just open that up in code, we should. So I've opened up that same folder, hopefully, up in code, and you should see, you'll see that I've got this jest config. I've got this
for the tests.
Yeah, for the tests, and then I've got a tests which like runs the tests for my infrastructure. Now, what I'm doing, if just to show you the test, because you're interested in that there, I've got one test to make sure that a queue is created, and one test to make sure that a topic is created. So the sample app, like the default sample application, what it does is it creates a queue, and then it creates some topics, and it subscribes to the topic. Now, the magic happens in this folder called library. This is what you'd call your CDK code. This is where the things are created. And so in the sample application, we create a queue, and we create a new SQS queue. We give the name demo FooBar queue, has a visibility timeout, a duration of 300 seconds, and then I create an SNS topic. And then what I do is I say, on this topic, add a subscription to my to an SQS subscription to that queue. So I think the reason they chose this as the sample is to show you, look, I'm creating two very different pieces of infrastructure, and then I'm tying them together, not through some random ID or something which is, I'm connecting them through objects. So I'm actually calling a queue, and somehow that queue is going to connect up to the thing that I'm generating. So
you don't need the ARN like in CloudFormation, that you need to do all this reference to
precisely
names
now,
and IDs.
It's absolutely using the ARN in the background.
Sure.
But you've created a queue. It knows what a queue object is. So when you add the subscription, it inspects the queue. It finds out what its ARN is. And what's also cool is that you don't really need to worry too much necessarily about the order in which things are getting built, because the CDK is smart enough to know that certain things need to exist before other things because of these connections. So it knows the order that it will need to actually build the infrastructure in the CloudFormation template.
Oh, nice.
Based upon the way that you're relating objects to each other. So this is going to create me a queue, a topic, and that's what the sample application will do. So if I was in my terminal here, and I'm just going to clear that for the second, I can use one of those commands to create the CloudFormation template. So if I just said CDK synth there, it will output to the console a CDK CloudFormation template. And if you look at this CloudFormation template, you'll notice that there's an SQS queue with a visibility timeout of 300. It's got all the stuff. Yeah, it's got, and then there's something else here, the topic, which is being created, and various other bits and pieces. And then you get some other information. This is metadata. And all this is used for is for AWS to know how you built this particular thing. So it's identical to CloudFormation script, apart from the fact that it has some SDK metadata, which helps the tooling know how to connect to it and how it was built and that sort of thing. But fundamentally, if I wanted to create a CloudFormation template which had a queue and wired that queue to a topic, then this is what I'd have to write.
Exactly.
So if I go back over to my project, you'll see there's actually a folder being created, and in that folder there is
the CloudFormation
template. So there's that one command, CDK synth, and what that does is says take the current project, generate a CloudFormation script. There is another command which is CDK deploy, which instead of just generating the CloudFormation template, it actually goes and deploys the CloudFormation template to your account. So we don't want that. We want to say I want to remove. I don't want a queue really in my stack. So I want to get rid of the queue. So I'm going to have to go into this folder, demo FooBar stack, and I say, well, I don't want a queue, so I'm going to delete that. And now you'll notice that all of a sudden my project is red squigglies now because I haven't created a queue. And also, this is a programming language, so I can see all of the different sort of methods on these objects. So if I wanted to and write topic dot, I have all of the things that you could do with a topic. It's like it's a programming language, right? It's not you having to go and reference some documentation about how you do this in CloudFormation. I can learn about it kind of using the code and how I'd explore a language or generally. So I don't want the queue and I don't want the topic or subscription. So now I've just got an empty stack. So if I save that and go back to terminal, why do I keep doing that? That's annoying. And I just clear that. Now, if I do a CDK synth, then it would just generate an empty CloudFormation template. I can also say CDK diff. And CDK diff, what it will do is that shows me the difference between what is deployed in the cloud and what I have locally on my machine. So we haven't got anything deployed yet, so that's not going to work yet. But the other one which we can do is CDK deploy. Now, if we do a CDK deploy at the moment, we're going to deploy nothing to my application, which is kind of rubbish. So we'll save that for the time being, and we'll get back to this particular project and show you kind of what we're going to start building. So I'm going to just quickly inside a new window. There's another thing that I'm going to run because I'm using TypeScript. I don't know if you know how TypeScript works, but you basically build TypeScript files and then you need to run a command to go and generate JavaScript files. That's how TypeScript works. It's a bit of a pain. So what we can do is just run, npm run watch on that folder. And what that will do is it will just be every time I edit a JavaScript file, it's going to compile my application.
Make the JavaScript for you.
Precisely, yeah. So if I type anything in here now, the TypeScript's going to get converted to JavaScript, and we're all good. So I'm going to
transpiling the word or something.
Transpiling, yeah. It's like transpiling my language code from TypeScript to JavaScript.
Weird word.
It's not compiling because it's transferring the thing, but it's interesting. On another deviation, when you do, if I'm writing one of these in Python, or if I'm writing it in C# or Java, we actually transpile it to TypeScript.
And then to JavaScript. No.
It ultimately all runs in JavaScript how it runs, and so it's really complicated, the build process that they've done for these things. They don't actually write a .NET version of the CDK and a Python version of the CDK.
No, sure.
They generate it all from the TypeScript version.
Wow.
Then so it means that everything that they write for the TypeScript one is supported. And if you want to write modules which work across all of them, you can write them. You have to write them in TypeScript and then export them for the other languages. But then those languages will work. Those modules will work in all the different languages as well. So we will need to go and get some libraries that we're going to be using, because we're not just going to be using. Over here we've got SQS, SNS subscriptions. We're not using any of those things. We're using the core, but we're going to be importing some other ones. So import star as I want to use EC2, and then I'm going to import it from. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes because I can't remember what these. I was going to say NuGet packages. What these npm packages are called? -CDK /AWS -EC2, and you'll see that because
it's suggesting you because it knows.
Yeah, it knows. That's something to do with TypeScript. It's something to do with for the way the CDK is put together. So I've got the EC2 one, which is going to load in an EC2 construct. We call these constructs. They're modules, but they call them constructs because these are the ones that are provided by the services, but you can write your own higher level constructs so that you can do like a one-liner, but then actually in the background, it's building much more complicated infrastructure.
Yeah. So you can basically write a module that, I don't know, creates a Lambda function with a Dynamo and an API gateway, and then pack it together, and then you don't need to write it ever again.
Yeah, precise, exactly. And so it's a little bit more complicated, than what it can do, but it's you can start building much more complicated sort of applications. I'm going to need a semicolon after that. I did tell you that I would make some semicolon mistakes.
Oh, don't worry. That's why Visual Studio Code will help you to tell you all the red things.
Yeah, although I've got another one called ECS patterns. Now, ECS patterns is actually a really interesting one because this is a higher level construct which has been built by AWS, but it's an example of being able to do, we'd have to do a lot more code for what I'm going to do if we weren't going to use this ECS patterns library. So this is like a higher level construct for the patterns. So that's AWS ECS-patterns. ECS-patterns, like that, I think.
The first one is complaining, I don't know why.
ECS is declared value is never read, cannot find module or its corresponding type declarations. So that means that it's not installed on my machine, I'm hoping. So what I'm going to do is just go and get that module and install it on my machine. So to install modules, it's npm, it's JavaScript. So I just go to my terminal. Oh, I need the other one. And I should be able to say npm install.
On the name of those modules.
Oh, I should have really put these into my clipboard, shouldn't I? Sorry, I'm going to have to write these out. AWS SDK.
No problem.
Okay, you can check my spelling. So AWS -EC2, and then I need AWS -CDK /AWS -ECS. Okay, and then the last
and then the pattern ones.
Yeah, so it's AWS-CDK /AWS -ECS-patterns like that. Okay, I'm just going to go with that and see what happens. So let's take a few seconds. It should do these npm stores in that local folder of those particular dependencies. Added 4 packages. This is one thing I really do love about Node. Like, I don't know how worrying I should find that it's found 4,281 low security vulnerabilities, but I've never done a Node install where it doesn't say something like that. So, okay. Yeah, never mind.
At least it's telling you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what I'm meant to do with that. So now the reds have gone because they are installed as modules.
Now you have your packages.
Yeah, so let's create our first thing, which is a VPC. So I'm going to create a constant variable called VPC, my virtual private cloud. Const VPC, and I'm going to just use one of these constructs, which comes from above. It actually comes from the EC2 library. And I'm going to say new EC2 .vp, and you'll see that it's telling me that I've got a VPC as an option. Oh, what did I click on that for? So I've got a VPC, and I'm going to open it up, and then it's in this editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code, but whatever editor as long as it's TypeScript aware, it would tell you what you would need to do.
Exactly.
So there's kind of a little sort of structure to the way these things work. Generally speaking, the first thing you pass over is this, which is like the current state of the object that you're coming from. And then a name for the VPC. We'll call that, just call it my cluster for the moment. And then in here, we need to then pass in an object which describes the properties of the VPC. Okay. So these are VPC properties. We could set them on that object after the fact. We could say VPC dot and then set some of these things. But the sort of a nice sort of freehand is we can just pass in an object and just define them. Now we're only going to set up one object, and you'll see as I'm typing, it's giving me the objects on that proper thing.
Yeah.
Max AZs is an option, and I'm going to say, well, max AZs 3. So I'm going to be using a maximum number of availability zones of 3 availability zones in that VPC. So my VPC will span across 3 availability zones. This will default to the maximum number available in a region. So if you were in most European regions, it'd be like
have 2.
No, they all have 3.
All have 3. Okay.
Yeah, 3. But after some of the US regions have 5 or whatever. If you left that blank, it would go to whatever was the default. I'm just going to show you that you could. That's one customization. There's max AZs 3. So I have that. I've got my VPC set up. 3 AZs. Like what? It might be interesting to just say, well, what does that look like now? Now I've built that. So if I go and say CDK synth.
Oh, that's a horrible cloud formation of creating a VPC.
Well, yeah. Look. Like literally, I wrote all that and all of that things, like all those crazy things, which I don't need to know what they are.
They're like 400 lines. I don't know.
It's a lot of lines, isn't it? I mean, I probably can find out, because if I went into, let me just go to the bottom of that and clear it. Because I said that the CDK actually gets output to this CDK folder, and I go into this one now. It is 450.
I tell you, there are like 400 lines of code when you write one line of CDK.
Yeah, and one of the problems, obviously, the thing is as well, and this is one of the reasons I'm not that keen on JSON and YAML files, is that let's say we wanted to make a change of a single variable in here. Like, then I've got to do a grep on the whole file. And have I got it right? Have I changed the grep in the right places? And like, this is the complication that these sorts of files represent. And some people are completely cool with that. But if you're not very organized, like I am, then it's actually like can be quite dangerous. Specifically, for example, I'll give you a solid example of this. Recently, I wrote a YAML template and I got the indentation wrong on one section.
Oh yeah, we all did that.
And I basically didn't provide the key to a particular object. And so nothing worked. And it was the indentation. And there's nothing which is telling me that I've missed off. Like actually, do you know what figured that was when I went to open it up in an application called Rider, which is an IDEA IDE. It actually showed me that there was an indentation error. I don't think any other IDE really shows that.
I have a linter for CloudFormation in Visual Studio Code, but my first time when I was using Cloud9, I was 45 minutes looking at a YAML document for something I have done like 20 million times, that is create a Lambda with a Dynamo and API gateway. I think I create at least one of those per day. And I was 45 minutes looking at it. It's like, what is wrong? I don't understand. And then I realized that everything was indented one way there. And I felt so stupid because it's something that I have not experienced for a long time because of this linter I have in Visual Studio Code, that I was just like, fuck. Just a waste of time.
Yeah. So you can see already, like at a VPC level, that saves you a ton of time, right? So I was sold on this project as soon as I saw that first. And you were like, all right, I get why that's valuable. So what I'm going to do next is I want to create a cluster, an ECS cluster, and I'm going to point to that VPC. Now, I'm just showing you this so that you can see how you can create different things and how they come about. But let's just for the basic thing, we're just going to create and do the same sort of pattern, but we're going to just say cluster this time, and we're going to create a new something. And if we didn't want to use Fargate, we could use this cluster to then generate tasks which are running on infrastructure which we manage, and you'd have to then come up with, in your CDK, you'd have to actually generate the images. You'd have to generate the instances and do that somehow. But we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to create a cluster, and then we're going to run some Fargate. So we're going to say create a new ECS cluster. And we're going to do the same thing where you pass in this object to the first parameter, and then we give it a name. This name's not that important. You don't ever really reference, as you've seen, you usually reference the objects in the code, but the actual output of the CloudFormation, it's where they use these names. So I guess there might be scenarios where you want, for some reason, the names to be specifically like useful or identify things.
But then, as you saw, the CloudFormation always adds some random at the end, so you don't need to worry that they are unique.
Yeah, they don't have to be. They add some randomization. You can almost certainly control that. Like there will be a way that you could switch that off if you don't want that to be the case. But like everything I build here will have a different name, which means that you shouldn't have any interference with different stuff. That's not to say that you won't. Like there are times when you will find that, especially if someone's went in and manually edited a stack somewhere, you can cause it's not clever enough to always know what the differences are if there's manual edits to stacks. But let's say in the best scenario, if you use the CDK throughout the pipeline and then don't modify the stack, it's very good at knowing not making those sorts of mistakes. And also it will never delete a resource which didn't belong to the stack, obviously, but there could be conflicts in certain services, I imagine, which could come about depending on what else you have in your account. But that's the cool thing. All the resources that we're creating here are going to be my cluster, then a random number. All we need to do, the only thing which I need to say for this is a cluster connects to a VPC. So I'm going to provide, it's got an object called VPC, and I'm going to basically say, well, the VPC is the VPC above it. So that cluster now is inside that VPC, and that's it set up. So like save that, and now if I do that CDK synth.
Yeah, I think now there is.
Oh, sorry, I've realized I called one cluster and one VPC. That should have been called my VPC, shouldn't it? There we go.
Namings are important.
Well, namings are important in your own file system. But
exactly.
So I obviously did that completely on purpose, just to show you that it's important in that aspect. So, but then again, that's another good thing, which I love the CDK for. It does stop you tripping yourself up. And so somewhere in there now, we're going to have an ECS cluster set up as well for us.
I think doing the CDK synth after you add the VPC is kind of pointless because the file is so big.
Yeah, at that point, I just wanted to say, well, what were we? It's added some, but not much to it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you see like how much extra VPC code that you've avoided. Now, the next one is a much more complicated kind of. It's going to do some much more stuff for us, and we're going to, because we're using one of this more complicated pattern. It's called the ECS pattern library, and so this is a construct which does a little bit more than what I've done. These have just created one piece of infrastructure. What I'm going to use.
One question: where you can find information about these modules? Is there like a web page in AWS that you can find all these things?
Yeah. So if you just go CDK documentation, then we have. API references, and basically these are all the modules that are available. So if you want to do,
and also this pattern is there as well.
Yeah, usually let's choose something which ECS, which we're looking at.
Oh, right? Nice. There are the patterns,
and you can see the patterns and how to create a VPC, how to create an ECS cluster. Nice. So you should there's technically CloudFormation doesn't cover all of AWS's services.
Sure.
The CDK wants to do everything that can only do everything that CloudFormation can do. It can't do anything above that. But we're not at 100% coverage of CloudFormation. So there's a subset of what CloudFormation can do, which you can actually do in AWS generally. Then there's also a slight subset of what CDK can do. Now you can write your own modules or your own constructs to do stuff that we don't support, and we massively encourage that. There's been loads of community sort of stuff around Kubernetes, for example. There's been like a big community involvement in generating some of the constructs for creating Kubernetes clusters.
Nice.
But I'd say that the CDK, that's maybe a thing that you come against. If you're using services which are a little bit less CDK friendly, then you might find that they don't have modules yet, or you can't interact with them. So that's something you should look at when you're building your stack. But I would say it covers a lot more than, say, SAM does at the moment. But it's
because SAM is just small. So
I imagine SAM doesn't have like a game lift construct. Like I wouldn't.
No.
But it might do. I don't know. It can build lots of different kinds of infrastructure, and some of these constructs are really, really good. And certainly I find the stuff around containers, especially ECS. Load balancers, those sorts of infrastructure, EC2 instances, all that sort of stuff is really good. But I imagine you will find that some of the services which are a little bit more niche might not have such great constructs. So you do take this, just to be aware, it's not 100%, it's not guaranteed. And you will find that when services launch, rarely at the moment are they launching with CDK like modules, sadly. It's the case that they don't necessarily launch with CloudFormation either.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the services are also launched in maybe beta or in like more experimental way. So it's kind of, if you make all this infrastructure set up, then it's very hard to change.
Yeah, well, CloudFormation, if CloudFormation commits to a pattern for its API, it has to stick with it. For backwards compatibility. So that's one of the reasons why when new services come out, they're not always straight with CloudFormation, because they might modify the API.
Exactly.
And CDK is similar. Like they want a kind of a firm CloudFormation basis, I imagine, before they start writing constructs. But just to tell you, that's how you would find it out. I would take it. Some of the documentation's fantastic. Some of the documentation's a little bit trickier, and I've certainly struggled with certain. I was trying to build a WebSockets API in API Gateway. It was harder. It was quite hard. It wasn't as straightforward as some of this other stuff. But your mileage may vary. So we're going to use this ECS patterns one. So we're going to say ECS underscore patterns dot application load balanced Fargate service. So no. So we're going to say an application load balanced Fargate service, and we are going to do the same little dance of putting this in there, giving it a name, which is my Fargate service, and then we will then provide the properties basically that we want this object to then start using and constructing with. So I think that's right. ECS patterns, yeah, and so. I have to tie up the cluster. So I say, well, the cluster that I want to use is this cluster here.
Created. Yeah.
So I've got the name cluster there. I would say, if you ever set up a Fargate task, there is these two modules, two things saying the CPU that you want to use and the memory and stuff that you can define for the particular task. It's not. Look at the documentation to figure those things out. They're numbers there. Actually, let's look at the documentation. One of the things you should see when you type in, say, CPU, is it tells you a little bit about what that means. So the number of CPU units used by this particular task. Valid values, which determine your range of valid values for the memory parameter. There is a link between the memory and the CPU parameters.
Yeah. Like Lambda as well.
Exactly, right. So there is some knowledge in here. I'm just going to use my notes to know which one I want to build. I'm just going to do 512. And I will then say, how many do I want of these tasks? So basically, how many containers do I want to run? So let's say we want 3 of those things to run.
And that will put 1 in each availability zone automatically.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, it should do. I think that's how it works. So I'm getting a little bit confused about my placement of things. But what you should know is that the Fargate is resilient to any kind of failure. So if you say you want 3, and let's God forbid 2 availability zones in a region failed, I actually don't know what would happen. No, theoretically it should still run because kind of, so it will still work. They'll still work. And it will connect into your VPC on your availability zone because I'm across 3 availability zones.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's it might have to recreate some of them but it will always try and get to a desired count of 3 containers running in whatever infrastructure is left. So you have to look maybe more deeply into the actual placement and placement strategy of Fargate. I'm not quite sure how it all works, but I do know that it's a resilient service that you don't have to worry about that aspect. If you say you want 3. It's going to run 3, and then it's going to connect back into your VPC across the number of AZs that you've chosen. Okay, so I've got desired count. Then this is the bit where it gets a little bit more complicated. We're going to have to say, well, what do we want on our containers? So what is a Docker image? And so we'd say task image options. And in there, we're going to then define an image. And there's a few different ways that we're going to be able to do that, and we're going to use a couple today. So we say image is ECS dot container image dot from registry, because I'm going to actually load this from an external registry. And by default, the registry it's going to look in is Docker. So
the answer is VeriSign Global Registry Services.
Alexa,
Does that answer your question?
Stop. Alexa, do not disturb.
I won't disturb you.
You already have. Anyway,
They are all listening on you all the time.
I don't know why. What am I saying? Which is activating them all. But this is the trouble when you're talking about AWS. You're using words. I would hate to be an evangelist.
Alexa developer.
Yeah, I'd hate to be an evangelist for that because she's always listening.
I did a video with Sohan about Alexa, and I got many comments that this video triggered all my Alexa devices.
Yeah. There's some kind of sound that they can play before the word Alexa, which will stop it starting. That's what they do on the adverts. When they play the adverts out.
Yeah.
She shouldn't respond to the adverts because they play something before which tells the device, this is a demo.
I should add that to my video.
Yeah, we need to find out what that is and how they do that, because it would be awesome if we could stop. I'm trying not to say a name here because I'm sure anyone watching this, there will be device activations. I apologize for that in advance. So how are we doing? We've got that saying, right, I want a container image from this registry, Amazon-ECS sample. That's actually on Docker Hub, even though it's the Amazon account on Docker Hub, and there's this sample that they have.
So that's a image that is built by someone else that is being put in this registry that we can use.
Yeah, it's like a serverless image because we're not managing the infrastructure it runs on. Docker Hub. If I just do Docker Hub Amazon, they have hub.docker.
It's like an Amazon Linux machine.
Yeah. They have Amazon. Doesn't matter. I put the actual correct one in there. So Amazon.ECS. We'll see the actual output for Docker Hub in a minute, but it's getting it from actual Docker Hub at this moment.
Yeah.
That's important that it's coming from Docker Hub. But it could come from Elastic Container Registry, which is our own version of that. So it's if you want a private container registry, then you could use that. Or any other container registry. I'm trying to think of other ones, but there are other ones which run out there, not just Docker Hub, which you can get from. The important thing to remember is you don't actually specify the registry; it defaults to Docker Hub. So we say task image options. I've got that memory usage. No, sorry, memory limit. Is that right? Why is it not giving me?
Comma?
Yeah. Memory limit. I want to set that to. I'm just going to. That value that isn't probably the right value that I need, but it's a large image, so a large memory. So I think the default is 512, but I've set it up there as well. And then I can say, do I want a public load balancer? And I just say, yes, I want a public load balancer. And what's cool about that is it's going to say a Fargate service for me. It's going to connect it to that image, and then it's going to create also a load balancer and front that service with a public load balancer.
Nice.
Now I can set up other things here. I could set up a domain. I could set up certificates to attach to this load balancer as well. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to use the default load balancer, and it's going to just run over HTTP.
Yeah.
If you're interested in how you set up domain names and so forth, that will be included in the GitHub repository that I'll share as well, which will be in the notes. So you can see how you connect it to a domain name and how you connect it to various other things as well. But we're just going to have a very regular public load balancer. And I think that's it.
That looks nice.
It should be it. Let's see. So let's do clear that. So I should be able to just say CDK deploy. Now, I've not set up any information about where I am in the what region and stuff. It's because I'm in my I've got AWS configured.
Yeah.
So AWS configure.
You have defined your favorite region and
Yeah, I've got my key. My region has been set to EU West 2.
Yeah.
And so it's going to deploy this to that region.
Yeah.
You can, if you want, set it up in the CDK file to do a specific region deployment.
Okay.
There's lots of different options you've got there, but by default, the way that I'm doing this at the moment is just going to deploy it to my account. So
and can you do CDK -- region and put the region name?
You probably can. I know you can definitely. I don't want to try it because you probably can actually, but you can. And what I often do is I provide parameters to my build. So I actually usually set them up as environmental variables, and then I will do a deploy, and then the CDK template looks for environmental variables and does switches. So I'll do regions in there. Now there is an environmental variable which it looks for, which is already defaulted to what the current region is. So I'm absolutely positive there will be a switch there which you can change that, and I would imagine it would be d -- region as well. But I'm not at this point of the demo willing to try.
Good.
But you'll see now it's saying, okay, we're going to have to make some changes to your. It's going to create everything, and what it tells you here though is like the security changes that it's going to make. I've got an IAM statement changes. I've got security group changes that I'm going to make. I've got a load balancer, so it's going to add a port 80 on my load balancer. It's going to create these different services and things. Do I want to deploy these changes? Yes. Nice. What it's going to do then is fundamentally it's creating it's doing a synth, and then once it's done the synth, it will go and deploy that out to the cloud. Now you'll see that it's starting doing a create in progress, and so this now at this point is just CloudFormation. It's effectively like executing a CloudFormation template. So if you go into if we just have a quick look inside.
Yeah, and I imagine if you go to, for example, your Node package project and you create there like a command, I don't know, npm deploy, there you can do your tests before deploying, like it will be like a normal application. So you could run your tests and your linting and then do a CDK deploy, and then you will make sure that everything is written correctly. Like the package JSON, that's where you will write that type of commands in Node, for example.
Yeah, so you could. We have an npm build watch test,
exactly,
which is just running on executing the local commands there. We could customize that. You could add different scripts.
Exactly.
So
that's super powerful.
Yeah. So so npm CDK will actually just execute the CDK command. So you could say npm CDK deploy, and it would actually be just running through npm. But so there's lots of different ways that you would obviously get this to set up. Now I'm running this. It's important to recognize that I'm running this though locally on my machine. And I'm deploying. Probably not the best way. Yeah, so it's not the best way, but this is quite cool that we can do this and useful for various things. But so we'll just quickly look at one thing I want to show you was so we've got that stack file, which is our actual stack. There is another file in here, and it will be in different places depending on the language, which is like how the application is created. So you'll see that I've got a new app, and I'm creating an app for a demo FooBar stack. So that's wired up. So when I actually execute my Node package, it's actually building an app and then creating a stack. Yeah. You can therefore have more than one stack for an app.
Nice. So you can build a multi-stack application with CDK.
Yeah, so have
without really need to worry about the...
Yeah, and it would have multiple stacks, or you could add switches in here, if different regions maybe do different thing in different regions. Maybe, for example, you have to set up a different ARN for a certificate, or you could do lots of different things in here. But this is the application that's getting executed in C#. This would be there's a console at entry point, which basically does this. I'm sure that in Python, it's running a console application.
Yeah. Yeah, you always need to have an entry point to your field.
Yeah, so. And what this application is doing is it outputs whatever synth would ordinarily output, and then that is then sent to the CDK command, which then does the CloudFormation deploy. And so you will see, or you should see.
Can you make the font a little bit bigger?
Yeah, I will do. As soon as I've actually got a connection to my, I'm thinking.
There is a creating process there.
Yeah, I think that's the one which we've done. Yeah, so that's the one. That would be demo FooBar stack, create in progress. 1 o'clock, which is roughly the time. So that must be the one which we've just created. And I've actually got another one which I'll show you a little bit later. So this is my my FooBar stack, and you'll see that all the events of what it's created. It's mental, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right. We've got all of the different resources that have been created, and eventually this will go green and tick. And we don't have any outputs at the moment, which is what we're waiting for, because once we've got an output, one of the outputs from that will be the URL for the load balancer, and then we'll be able to go to that, and we'll be able to see our website running.
Because in that application, the sample one that you put, there is some kind of website already.
Yeah,
inside.
It's actually a PHP.
Nice.
A PHP. Let's quickly let's go and have a look inside of some of the other services and see if they're starting up as well. So we were doing it inside of ECS, weren't we? So if I just go in ECS and I look, we've got a cluster which has been setting up, and we've got a service, and it's got 3 running tasks. So if I go in there, and you'll see that there's some tasks running, and there's 3 running tasks. Okay, I think you remember I put 3 in that where I wanted 3 of them.
Exactly.
And there's a task running, there's a task definition, and that task definition is running this particular container, Amazon ECS sample.
That's the sample one.
It's listening on port 80. There's a container port 80, protocol TCP. So actually, the thing's built. Like my service is built. So this would be what I would create. This is what a Fargate service looks like. You have a service and you have the tasks running. Now all the tasks are running, so my containers are running, but there must be a load balancer somewhere which is being built for this as well. So that load balancer will be existing in my account somewhere. It doesn't really matter. I'll just see if it's built. Look, cool, that's great. So the demo FooBar stack now is create completed, and it's now got its 2 outputs. So hopefully, if I click on the output, we've got a sample PHP application. Got
modern and current.
For whatever reason, the ECS sample container uses a PHP application, and you'll see that it's created a load balancer. Now we could go to that load balancer. I could manually configure certificates. I could manually set up a domain name, but the best way of doing that would be going back to the CDK and editing that and assigning all those things up. So that's one portion of it. We've got a Docker container which is running from there, but you probably want to run your own Docker containers. So
exactly.
Let's just do that little bit then. Let's go and create our own Docker container. So I'm going to do it locally on this machine, and I'm going to create a new folder. Oh, and this is a thing which I always struggle with.
You need to be in the root of the project.
I am in the root. Yeah,
I think now.
It's created in bin.
No.
So how do I? I've often struggled with this with.
I stand usually in the README or somewhere there and press new file.
Yeah, but if you click that one, it doesn't ever seem to be able to create it in the root. So if I just create a folder called container, and inside this container folder, I add a new file, and we'll call that index.html.
Good.
And
that's something very good to put inside a container because it's very dynamic.
Hello.
For the sake of the demo is good, but you should put this in as free.
Sorry?
That in a real case scenario, put it in as free, and it will be cheaper and way easier.
Oh yeah. This is probably not
for the demo
the best container workload, but we've got a container with an index.html. Fantastic. And then we go. I'll create a new file, and that will be called Docker. Docker file.
You put Docker.
That means something. Docker file like that. Okay, so now I've got a Docker file which is there. So inside the Docker file, I'm just going to say from Nginx. Nginx. Do I just want Alpine? Yep, Alpine. So I don't know how familiar you are with Docker, but this is
a million years since I don't run a Docker machine, but I imagine that's the base image where you're getting
that's the base image that I'm saying, and then I'm going to say I want basically anything in this folder. I want to take everything in this folder and I want to copy it to the folder on the container, which is users/share/nginx/html, which is like the root file for an nginx image. So basically, I'm replacing whatever's in that folder, or I'm copying everything into that folder, which is in my current folder. So what will happen is the index file goes into that folder, and because I'm using nginx, it's already set up to use port 80 and stuff. So that's all my Docker image needs to be. That's done. So I've got a Docker image which is going to create index.html. Now I could go into that folder, and I could, if I went to CD container, I could go and build that Docker image. So I can say Docker build and then create that. But I'm going to use the CDK to just build that Docker image for me.
Okay.
So I'm going to save all that as it is so far. And I need to go now into my stack. And instead of saying I want to get something from
the Docker registry.
Precisely. I want to take my container image from my local file system. So we have, instead of saying from registry, we have this thing saying from asset. And we can say, instead of passing over like a thing, why is it not doing that? We can say path.result. I think I need to include path in my project. So import star. I'm never familiar with how you do an import in TypeScript. So import as path from, and then the pass in that, doesn't it? Is that right? Oh, path. What am I talking about?
No, from.
Yeah, like that. Right. And then I'll put one of those in. I don't know if that's needed, but I like to be safe. So so now I have path. So there should be an object on that saying resolve. Yeah. Resolve.
It was there. Yeah.
And then I'd say dir name container. Is that right?
Yeah, container.
That's
Everything that is in the folder.
Container, right? So it's saying now image, ECS, container from image, from asset. So it's basically going to take whatever's local and it's going to do a Docker build for me. It should do anyway. So let's have a look. I think I've got everything I need to do. We'll have to the easiest way is just to go, let's build it. So let's go and do let's see what happens. Oh, what's that? Oh, right, I'm in the wrong folder.
That's scary.
I went to the containers folder and
forgot back.
Yeah, so I now just do CDK deploy from there. Image directory lib container. Oh, what is that?
Oh.
What folder am I in at the moment? I'm in there. Oh my containers. It's looking in the lib folder. I need to go one out of the. It's in the. This is running or executing in the lib folder. So I need to say, is it that?
Yeah.
Command S. CDK deploy. Do you want to deploy these changes? Yay. Yes. Now
we need to wait.
What you see here is Docker builds. So it's built that Docker image. What it then does, it takes that Docker image and it puts it into a private repository in ECR, which is our container registry. You don't need to set any of that up. You don't need to create a repository. It's just doing that for you. It also is doing adding some of these assets into S3 for you. When you run these commands on your own machine, it might say you must bootstrap first. You might have to run a command saying CDK bootstrap, and all that does is creates a little place where it can put some of these assets whilst it's building. And what it's going to do is build that Docker container, put it into ECR. Then the CloudFormation is going to then pull from that ECR container and pull our thing. So that's quite cool. We're building it from a local machine, probably not the greatest, but hopefully now, if I go into, let me just have a look into this. What you'll see is,
Should be the same?
No, it should be the same because we've not yet.
Exactly.
It's going to take a little while before the new container takes over. So what's cool about ECR, I'm just using the default like cutover effectively. What it's going to do is it's going to create 2 new tasks, and it's going to then kill the other 2 tasks, and then my new website, my container will be the thing which has been served. So if we go into ECS, we should see, as things start getting built, we will see, there's 4 running tasks now. And the reason there's 4 running tasks is because it's probably, there's actually started building a number of tasks. It builds the new tasks, and then it depreciates the old ones when they're running.
It's doing like a blue-green deployment or something like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily doing blue-green in that it's not, it does wait, but there are ways of probably doing canary and blue-green deployments, but this is just kind of basically doing a really quick cutover. You have options of saying like, do it to 50% of the new container and those things. But at the moment, it's
you can do that with code deployed at least.
Well, you can do, and you absolutely can do that through here as well. But by the default, it's just doing like it's standing it up, and then it will do a cutover. And it will only do a cutover, obviously, if the other containers start successfully, and they look like they are running successfully. So what will happen now is you'll gradually start to see the other containers
fading away,
and you'll note that 3 of them are using this version 1 of the task definition, and 3 of them are using version 2 of the task definition. And now, if we click on this task definition, this basically should say, okay, we're using this image.
Yeah.
And this is like an image in my account, in my ECR account. I didn't set it up, but you'll see like it's random numbers and stuff. But that's my Docker image. That's basically that HTML Docker image. So we have the containers running. Now it's whether or not the load. Oh,
Woohoo!
That's sort of right, and it's sort of wrong. For some reason,
the index didn't load.
Yeah, but I don't know why. Did it not copy the files in? Because it definitely should. Or did I call it something else?
Can you do index.html?
Oh, that should have worked. I mean, that's exactly how it should have worked. But have I put it in I put it in the right file? Index.html in my Docker file. Copy dot. Is that right? Copy dot. Oh, that's really disappointing and annoying. I don't know why that's not working. Docker file container index.html. I'd have to look at why that's not the case. That should totally work, but there's some
live coding.
Yeah, well, it's basically it must be it's a Docker file issue, and someone watching this is probably, if I spell everything right in there. Oh, USR. So basically, there's a folder called user in my Docker. That's so annoying, isn't it? That's such a Windows thing to make a mistake on as well. Why would it be user? User search. So if I actually save that new thing, I'm just going to go ahead and it's still deploying that Fargate service, of course. Yeah. If I went and deployed that, then you would get it would replace the existing Nginx, and you would get hello FooBar. I will try and do a deploy and prove that that's the case, but I made a typo. Anyway, so yeah, exactly. But obviously, it's just running your container. So whatever's in your container, and my container is, I incorrectly set it up. So okay.
So now we have kind of everything done from our local machine. Maybe we can set it up with some more automation.
Yeah. So
something we can do.
Yeah, there's lots of ways you could do this, right? So bear in mind, I had like 3 commands, the CDK commands that I was running at command line. So if whatever build system that you're using, you could absolutely just pick that one up and then execute the command. So you can just say CDK deploy, and it will work as you'd expect it. So you would effectively, instead of doing it from my local machine, you'd be doing CDK deploy from
Jenkins.
Yeah, or from whatever system that you use. Now, I want to do it from code. I'm going to try and do it through code pipeline. So code pipeline is our sort of automation, CI/CD automation, and basically we can build a pipeline of how we're going to get our build. But what I'm going to do, because that's because it's AWS services, I can build my pipeline in CDK.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I can build my pipeline in CDK and then tell my pipeline to then subsequently build my other stack and then deploy that other stack.
So we can have these 2 stacks now in our app.
Yeah, so our app's going to contain at least 2 stacks. Now, I would go and do all of this live, but we've got less time, and it would take me ages to do it. It would take me ages to get it right. And as you've already noticed, I can't even spell user correctly. So I would, so it would fail on that point. But the principle is the same as what we've done before. And so I'm going to show you something that I've built before and explain.
I have a whole series on building code pipelines, but with CloudFormation. So then they can go and compare how much code you can write with one or the other. It's just like
so exactly. It's I think generally it's quicker to write it this way. But there's a lot more code to create a pipeline. It's a little bit more of a complicated thing. So what I now have is it's roughly the same project. So I started from the same sample application. I built it all the same way. So the structure's the same. I have a folder which is called container in this application. And I have, in my library file, I have 2 stacks now.
Yeah.
I've got one which is called CDK FooBar stack, which is effectively the same stack we built before. So there's a VPC, there's a cluster, there's a few other things that I'll point out in a moment. And then there's a pipeline stack. And this pipeline stack is basically to build the pipeline for my CI/CD pipeline. And then I've got a container. It has a little bit more stuff in it. And also, I've correctly spelled user in that one, so that one actually works. Yeah, and we've got a container folder. Now, it's cool that you can do that build from asset thing. I really like the fact that you can do that build from asset, but it is kind of like, I don't know how helpful it is in a CI/CD pipeline kind of way, because I almost want it to be slightly more split out than that. I want to get the source, do the builds, do a deployment. And so I have actually organized it in a slightly more uniform sort of 3-stage process. I could have multiple builds in here as well, but I've only just had one build thing. But I'm effectively executing, I'm going to be effectively executing commands in my build pipeline to execute the CDK. So one other big change in my application is now in that entry point, I no longer just have 1 stack, I have 2 stacks. You can see that I've got a CDK FooBar stack and a CDK pipeline stack. Now that will create a slight bit of confusion when you are using terminal. So let me just show you what I mean. So this should be in, where am I at the moment? If I CD into projects, and there should be CD into CDK dash FooBar, and we look at that. This is the place that I'm in. So if I want to do a CDK deploy in here, it will error because this app contains more than a single stack. So you actually, if you do a deploy, you actually physically have to say which portion that you want to deploy.
Okay.
Interestingly, if you do a synth, you don't, because it will just generate both. It will just generate both and put them in the out folder. But if you actually do want to deploy, you have to then specifically. So I would say CDK deploy CDK FooBar stack or CDK pipeline.
But maybe that's also to remove some extra network thingies, because if you are planning to deploy maybe the other stack, you have not done any changes, or you are working on it and you don't want to deploy it. So I don't know.
Well, there's loads of things, but it's basically the ambiguity of it. It's saying, well, there's I can see more than 1 stack. I'm not going to I'm not going to guess, and I'm not going to do them both.
Exactly.
So that's just so that you know that that's one of the complications that by adding multiple stacks to an app.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that will change for you. This one looks like it's been built. Oh, that's done. Now, so I'm just going to redeploy that with that new fix.
Yeah, that's the one with the weird user.
Hopefully, just so that I can put through that. There should be one change to that Docker layer, which was different. That's already pushed that Docker change, because it's a tiny little typo, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then it will create a CloudFormation change set. ECR does take a little bit of time to obviously create the containers and restart them and stuff like that. But hopefully, I'll leave that going on in the background, and then we'll come back to that if we can. So I've got these 2 stacks. I'm sorry that I'm flicking between screens like a crazy person. But there we go. We've got pipeline stack and CDK FooBar stack. There's a couple of things I just want to point out. One is that when I create a stack, I'm passing in variables to the stack. And this means that I can change what it's building. And one of the things that I'm passing into the FooBar stack is the image name. So the image is always called name, FooBar, but I'm going to tag it with something. And that's used quite commonly when you're deploying containers. You say, I want to tag this container or that container. So you'll often see it will say the tag will be latest, and that will just take the latest container. Yeah. But what generally with a CI/CD pipeline you want to do is you want to link your containers to your code repository. So what I do in this process is I once I've basically got the latest code, or the latest thing, there is a variable which describes it's a GUID which describes the current code commit ID. And then I use that to tag the container. So there's a way of me going back and saying, okay, that container's in production. What
and actually this is the commit?
That's the commit which assigns to that container. So I do have a slight little thing in there now where I've got this tag which is now being passed into the stack. And then I've got a pipeline which says I want a code commit repo name. So the one thing that I didn't create manually here was the code commit pipeline. Now this could be GitHub, but I've used code commit, which is our source control service. Yeah. I've actually never used it before. This is the first time I ever used it.
How was the experience?
It's Git. It's fine. It's no problems at all. The only thing actually I noticed that which annoyed me slightly was that the UI for it, you can't look into a file's history on the UI. You need to use a tool to do that. And I usually am used to going onto GitHub and just looking at a file history. But never mind. There was one sort of element of it. But the cool thing is it's obviously private, and that's useful in some scenario. So I'm just saying, well, the repo name in my account is called FooBar, and that's what it's being sent into this pipeline stack. So let's have a look at my pipeline stack. Now,
and I wonder how it affects your code pipeline deployment, because sometimes when you're downloading the source, it takes quite a long time if your source is quite big. So I wonder if you are using code commit, if it speeds everything up because everything is in the same.
Yeah, well, it's going to be at least in the same. Exactly, it's going to be on the same. It's going to be quicker than having to go to an external
GitHub. Yeah.
I would almost. I imagine the GitHub's got pretty decent bandwidth and connections and stuff like that, but it's not going to be as quick as region, insiders.
I don't. And if you're in a public GitHub, maybe you don't. I don't know, but I think it might help a lot. I need to check it out.
It'd be interesting. I mean, there are genuine reasons why you would use something like CodeCommit over something like GitHub, but for the purposes of this, it really doesn't make much difference. No. One of the things I would say with code pipelines, because it's part of code pipelines, it does make it I think it's easier to work with than if I had to go and then authenticate against.
Yeah, because you need to add like a token and like create all this security around it. So.
Whereas this one, I can just do it all through the IAM permissions of the building, whatever's doing the build, which is cool. And talking of IAM permissions, I have done I created an IAM permission or an IAM role, and this is me creating an IAM role in CDK. So I've created a role, and this is going to be used all throughout my build for all the different steps of my build. And I found you don't have to actually set up a role to do this. You could just, if you leave no role and you don't add in a role to anything, it will basically very easily and very quickly just set up and it would run. But I want to go and call ECR. So I needed to give something, the permissions for ECR. And so I found it easier to create my own IAM role. And then somewhere in here, I give that IAM role a policy, the role add and manage policy to be able to go and get into EC2 container registry. So I'm basically managing my role in my infrastructure as code as well, which is cool because if I delete my stack, then all the IAM roles will be deleted for this particular project as well. And I'm being really explicit about the security for this particular thing. I'm saying this role is the build role, and it's able to access this service and this service. And I'm not just assigning a role that I've created somewhere else. Yeah. I'm being very specific. So, it's created an IAM role for me, and that's how I create an IAM role in CDK. I say I've got a constant called code, which is pointing to my repository. and it's using the property repo name, which was passed into this stack, to then basically retrieve the code. And then I'm creating a build for my pipeline. So I'm creating a pipeline project. So this is there's a lot of code here, but this is basically the build spec.
Yeah.
Right. So this would ordinarily be a file. If you've used code pipelines before, you would have a build spec for your build. This is the build spec, and I'm just writing it.
So you're defining it there. Instead of putting it in the base of your project, you just put it there.
Yeah, so I think you could say build spec from object. It's probably got build spec from source file name, or you could load it as you could put like a build spec file in your project.
Yeah, because if you put it in the root, at least with Lambda, if you put it in the root of your kind of project, then it's just take it from there. You don't need to define it. But
yeah. So what I'm doing in my build effectively is I'm echoing some stuff. I'm saying logging into Amazon ECR, and I basically log the machine which is doing the build into my ECR account. So these commands, you'll find them inside the ECR console. It's basically going get the login for the ECR system, and then it does a Docker login so that Docker is able to get attached to the repository for ECR. Because when I do a Docker push, I'm not going to be pushing it up to Docker Hub. I'm going to be pushing it to Amazon ECR.
Yeah.
So I have to log into Amazon ECR in my build client when I'm building to go and do that. So all this does is basically basically logs me into ECR. Then I start generating some information. Like I mentioned that I'm going to tag the images with various different things. So I get the code build source version, and I cut to 7 digits and get a commit hash. And then I get an image hash, which is basically the commit hash. And if the commit hash is blank, it will go to latest.
Yeah.
And then I just echo those out so that I can see them in the console. I can see what the image tag and the commit tag is. And then I do some install. I need npm install. So it'll install all the project. And then I'm basically building the project. So I'm doing npm run build. I'm exporting a CDK tag name, which is basically a property that I'm going to inject into my CDK project, which gives me what the name of the image that I'm going to deploy is. And then instead of npm deploy, what I do is I synth it. I don't do a deploy. And this is quite important, because I say I'm going to synthesize the CloudFormation script and output it to a folder called distribution. Now, if I said deploy, at that point it would actually do the push to CloudFormation. But I didn't want that to happen. I wanted it to build the CloudFormation templates for me and then put them in a folder. And what I'm going to do in the next step is actually use CloudFormation to deploy them.
You're creating your artifact now, basically, that if you will have multiple stages, then you can use the same artifact and deploy it into multiple stages. I don't know if you have multiple stages, but that's a really good practice in general, because you're testing and validating the same artifact over and over again.
So out of this, I'll have an artifact which will be a CloudFormation template.
Exactly.
And that's great. I can use it in the next step, and that's what I do to then go deploy it.
Yeah.
But like technically, I could actually just run CDK deploy here, and I would have 2 steps in my project, and it would be all dandy. But it's quite nice to be able to see what the CloudFormation was before it was deployed, and it helps for. Also, I could probably split this up into a couple of builds. I'm doing that, and then I'm also cheekily in the same build, I'm actually doing my Docker build, which I probably should have stepped that out, but I didn't for speed. So then what I do is I go and do a Docker build, and a Docker tag. So I'm basically building my Docker image. I'm not using that system which I showed you earlier to do the Docker.
Yeah.
I'm actually using real Docker commands to do it. And that's because you have a little bit more control over what's happening, and I can see what's happening with it. And also, I just prefer it this way. And also, then I'm able to tag the build artifacts with the names that I want, and also the tags of the source code that it's built from.
No. And then, this is being uploaded to your repository in Amazon.
Well, it will do here. Look, because I'm logged into ECR. So the first thing was I logged into ECR, and then I did a Docker push. Now, if I was using Docker Hub, then I would have had to log into Docker Hub there. Yeah. And then I would do a Docker push. It would have loaded up to Docker Hub. If I'm using another repository somewhere else, then I have to log in. So it's quite nice that there's this simple command just to log in to my ECR account. And then I do a Docker push. And then I basically tag the container with latest, and also a version of it tagged with the image tag. So the latest if I go to my repository for my container, the latest version will be that container, but also there'll be an independent version of it, which is tagged with the code
hash.
The hash from the code, yeah. And then I output an artifact, which is that the base directory, that distribution folder,
the CloudFormation, basically.
Which has the CloudFormation templates, and then I actually output that particular file, that template file that I want. Okay, I set up the build image that I want it to run on, and because I'm doing Docker, the environment has to be privileged. If you don't put privilege there, then Docker will fail.
Okay.
I'm also then assigning a role, and that was the role that I created earlier, which is going to be the execution role for that particular build. So
the one with the permissions to the ECR.
Yeah, it's got permissions to ECR. So when it goes to, if you don't have a role with permissions to ECR there, you'll just get an error saying could not connect to ECR to pull the image. So I've got that.
And there I see one of the things that you were mentioning before, that you have the role defined after that you use it, basically. Because there you're adding the managed policy of the ECR, but actually, if you will do CloudFormation, you will have to do it that way.
You'd have to do that before it, right? But it made sense for me to add it there because I was like, but yeah, equally I could put it above it or whatever. It doesn't matter because the CloudFormation it generates will do it all in the right order, but I'm actually doing it in a bit of a different order. So then I've got my outputs from my source output and my build output, and then I've got another section in my and then I put like the whole pipeline together. So I've got my build sections, and then I actually construct them into a pipeline. I found this quite confusing about AWS code pipeline. You kind of create a build and multiple builds, and then you sort of connect them all together with a pipeline. So I
think that the build is just the code build thingy.
It is code build, yeah.
So exactly. So that's the configuration.
That object that I created up there is a code build thing, right?
It is code build, configuration, and properties and whatever. So you define the Docker machine you want, you define the build spec, and you define all the stuff. And then when you create the pipeline, because you could use Jenkins for your build, so then you could don't need that build spec, for example.
Right. So then I need to establish the pipeline that I actually want this build in the order I want it built in. So then I've got this pipeline, and it's got a stage where it goes and gets the source code, and it uses the repository code which I set up earlier. And it does that source code. Then it does a build stage, which basically runs the build that I just created. And then it does the deploy stage. And this deploy, you'll see it's doing a CloudFormation create update stack action. And it's using the artifact, which was output by CDK. So I'm actually not really using CDK deploy at all. I'm using CDK to generate my CloudFormation template. I'm saving that as an artifact. And then in the next step, I'm using regular CloudFormation to actually go and deploy that. So it's important to remember that there's nothing special about the CDK. It just generates CloudFormation. And so you can then use that CloudFormation output in any way you want. So now I have like a deployment pipeline locally, and it's clever enough that it knows how to build the other thing. It knows how to go and build my other image. So if I build this pipeline, it will create a pipeline, that then whenever I check in this code, that pipeline is going to execute, and it's going to build my actual stack and deploy my actual stack. Does that make sense?
It's very meta, but
It is a little meta. I'm creating a pipeline. Now, the actual initial pipeline, I won't create with CI/CD. I'll create on my local machine.
Exactly.
So I would actually go on my local machine, and I would deploy the pipeline and say CDK deploy pipeline. And then what will happen is then inside of over on code pipeline, you should see I have a code pipeline which has been set up. And if I click into that code pipeline, it has 3 stages: my source stage, the build stage, and the deploy stage. Source stage, it goes to code commit, and it goes and gets the source code. It passes that over as an artifact into the build stage. The build stage then basically takes that source code and then builds my second stack. It synthesizes it into CDK. It outputs that file into the deployment, and then I deploy that to CloudFormation, and it ultimately should end up deployed.
Whenever you push goes to code commit, this pipeline will get triggered and will start.
Yeah, so if we go into
you can see it.
if we go into this bit here and go to my index.html and say we have launched FooBar to Fargate, and I just like put a double exclamation in there, like a big file change, and I save that, and then I
push it to code
file
commit,
save all, and then I just go made big huge change, and then commit that, push that to cloud commit. That will then trigger my pipeline. So, I mean, we should see.
Yeah, and that's really cool because it's very visual, so you can see everything and even get inside the code build and see all the things that you echo there, and it's just...
Yeah, so now we've got a build now in progress, and it's based upon, I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, that was super fast, the source.
It's very, very
wow. Quick. That takes so long when, well, maybe your project is tiny, but I have not deployed very big projects with serverless.
Let's have a look at, open the link in the AWS code commit. I'll show you how big the source is.
Yeah.
It's a few files.
Well, I think I have defined smaller projects because they are usually Lambda functions with things, and they take longer. So that was very fast.
Yeah, the build's going to take a little bit of time. It's using Docker, obviously. It's got to push the image, so it's going to take a little bit of time. And then the deploy will take even more because it has to the ECR. So it's not going to be like this particular CI/CD pipeline isn't going to be like super quick. I make a change and it instantly reflected. It does take about 10 minutes probably to filter all the way through. But it's doing like lots of different things for me, and so that's it's kind of cool. So obviously, if you want to go and look into any of these steps as well, it's a code build thing, so you can click through and see what's happening.
Yeah.
You'll see that it's building my Docker container. It looks like it's still building a Docker container at the moment. But you can see that all through the code pipeline what it's done. Somewhere in here, it will have done like the pre-build stage. It will have logged me in somewhere.
There it says login success.
Yeah, look, log in, and it's giving me a warning saying your password will be stored unencrypted in that particular Docker image. So there's probably some level of the Docker container is thrown away immediately. So, but that is the only way we can get into our ECR account. So it's being piped in across. You could configure a credential helper to remove this warning, and then it's basically going through all the commands in my build, and eventually that will. This is one of the first times I actually use this pipeline stuff. It's quite good. You can just sit here and watch this, and it's live. Yeah. Like it feeds as it's coming from the machine, so you can see what's happening and what's going on. And you can look at everything, like the different phases. If there's any environmental build details, you can look at the outputs from the artifacts. So let's say it didn't deploy as you expected. You could actually examine the CloudFormation templates for yourself if you wanted to. So let's go back to that pipeline, into my pipelines. Oh, and that succeeded. So it should have gone. Now that one's deployed and it's gone through. So that one we will need to just have a look. If I go to CloudFormation, I'm going to have two stacks here now. I can't remember which one. That is the one which I've been built today.
The demo is the one that we created first, and the FooBar is the one that is with the pipeline.
Yeah, so this one should have an output, and there we go.
Woohoo.
And after a amount of time, when it actually switches out the containers, it will put another little thing in there, and we will be good. So yeah, that's kind of the same sort of principle. We're building a container image. We're outputting it to Fargate in this sort of deploying it to Fargate in the same sort of way. The only complication really is that now we've got this sort of CI/CD thing in the background, so that whenever I check into my code base, it will do an automatic deploy for me. Now, I recognize it's quite meta that we create that code commit and code pipeline through CDK as well. You absolutely don't need to do that. You could create the code pipeline however you normally do it and running it that way.
The good thing, at least I have created my code pipeline with CloudFormation, and I've been using it for so many projects because it's just changing, in your case, a repo name, and then you can add stages, and then you can have pipelines for all your projects, super simple. So definitely create your meta pipelines, because then you will have pipelines in a super easy way, because they are more or less the same. You might add a new stage or remove something, but at the end of the day, I think it's really easy than going to the console and tiki and configuring everything over and over again. Because at the end of the day, if you do Docker or like Fargate or serverless, the pipeline might not differ a lot from each other. So
yeah, well, the cool thing is as well about constructs. One of the things that we sort of suggest as a best practice is if you sort of build your pipeline and you've defined the pipeline the way that you want, you can package that up as a higher level construct. So then you could say FooBar dot create a pipeline, and then it would build the pipeline exactly how you want it. And you could have different parameters on that pipeline about how the pipeline is built. But then anyone else using the CDK could come to your company and they, well, how do we build pipelines in FooBar? And they'll say, well, you do it this way. You would just type this command and then you put these parameters in, and then all the magic happens in the background. And so we can
no copy paste.
Yeah, start standardizing about how we build infrastructure, how we do. Really cool. You know, once you defined your blue-green deployment in CDK, you can then share that as a higher level construct, a one-liner maybe, to your rest of your team, and then you can all start building in the same sorts of way. So that's one of the reasons why CDK is, we hope that it's really adopted, is because it will become a really good way of standardizing how your customers, how customers build infrastructure in AWS.
That's super cool. Yeah, I think that's one of maybe encouragement for me to start using CDK, because I've been trying to find, like, I do a lot of serverless projects, but then I also build infrastructure like these pipelines or things like that to support my serverless projects. So maybe it's kind of a good way to start packaging them and putting them in some, I don't know, code artifact.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of putting it in NPM.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn with CDK, but I think it's one of the things that definitely it pays back once you've learned. I don't know very easily how. I never set up VPCs myself anymore. I just use a construct that I've created for creating VPCs. Nice. And so, there's Lambda functions. I have a package that it builds and deploys Lambda functions in the way that I build them and deploy them. So I really like it. I find it really useful. But I must say there's been a learning curve. And I have a good reason to learn it, because I work for AWS and show this stuff. And but I'm just sort of telling people who are watching this, it is way worth exploring, spending a day picking it up, because it pays back dividends in the time you'll save.
Yeah. But I'm amazed with all the things. I think this is going to be a long episode after I finish editing, but I learned so much on Fargate, on CDK, on things that I already have used before, like code pipeline and things like that. And I hope, like, you guys that are watching also learn a lot. And I think I'm super excited to try CDK in a more realistic way now.
Well, you don't want to just use CDK to deploy a single page website?
No, for that I will keep doing as free. But I think for the other bits of the infrastructure, because, for example, I've been now looking at the new features of Lambda, like the EFS, that you can add the file system to it. But for that, you need a VPC. And I'm being like, I need to build this from scratch. Yeah. I hate it. But now I remind how easy it is to do it with CDK. So maybe I go that route.
Well, the cool thing is, obviously, if you're interested in this, you can go and get all the demo and stuff. And the cool thing is, if you download these files, you can literally type CDK deploy and build what we've just been building. So one of the things I really like about it is that the shareability and this is the same with CloudFormation or any infrastructure code. It's like you can just share it, and then someone else can build it in their account immediately without having to worry.
Exactly, and that's one of my favorite parts of SAM, CloudFormation, Amplify, all these kind of things that you can just put it in GitHub, somebody can download it and start working on it.
Well, SAM's particularly good though. One of the things I love about SAM, which doesn't currently exist in the CDK world, is that ability, the serverless application repository.
Oh yeah.
Which have you've seen that, where you can go you can go to somewhere which is hosted SAM, and then you deploy. And I use that a lot in workshops. I've built the infrastructure and I've built the stuff they'll need, and then they can just go do a one-click deploy into their account, and it'll deploy all the infrastructure they need.
But it's not the same as the constructs that you were mentioning before?
Well, still, someone's going to have to, you can do that through the console. Like at the moment, because the service, because you can publish one of those, and then someone can go to a URL, they can press an orange button, and it will deploy in their account. We don't have a serverless application. We don't have like a CDK deployment repository. So you'd actually literally have to download the thing, build the application, deploy the application.
There is that for CloudFormation, not like not repository, but there is many of the AWS web pages that have a button that deploy the CloudFormation. So.
Exactly. You could set this up with CDK because I could output the CloudFormation template, and then you could wire up the buttons and then go and deploy that. But I mean, Sam makes that super easy.
Yeah. And it's so easy to publish and to collaborate as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will wrap this up because I imagine that we can talk forever because we are very passionate about all these topics and we are very quiet people all the time. So.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm super happy that you show all of these things. Where people can find you in the internet? What is your favorite place?
Well, you remember at the start of the show, I said I was a .NET person. So my URL for my website is thebeebs, TheBeebs.net, thebeebs.net. So I talk generally about .NET stuff, but I'm also do a lot of other things as well. So thebeebs.net.
Okay, I will leave also your Twitter if you use that one, and LinkedIn and all that, and the GitHub.
Yeah, I don't use LinkedIn.
Me neither.
I'm definitely there, and like people can add me and stuff like that, and I'll accept you, but I don't really use it at all. But Twitter I use a lot, so I'm at the Beebs on Twitter. Cool.
So I will leave those in the description box so people can go and ask you all questions about .NET, containers, CDK, and the universe itself. So thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate this.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was my video for today. I hope you like it. If you did, give a big thumbs up and let me know in the comments who I should talk to next or which topics you are interested in. I love making content that you are interested in hearing. And in the comments there are always all the links that we cover during this chat, so go ahead and check it out. And I'll see you in the next episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!